Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside, you find a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and, well, which of those 10 rules do you think we actually still need to follow? At a corner table by the fire are 3 people. One of them is wondering if, in the grand scheme of life, he's the detective or the Watson. And that's me, your host, Matthew Mellema, and welcome to Believe to See. We are a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. The Anselm Society is a coalition of churches across the Front Range of Colorado dedicated to a renaissance of the Christian imagination. To find out more about the Anselm Society, please visit us at anselmsociety.com, and please rate and review our show on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We really appreciate all the reviews that we've been getting, and please keep them coming. They help us out a ton. And now for today's episode, I want to reintroduce someone. We had a long discussion before this started about what I was going to call her. So her name is Lisa Ryther, but I'm going to call her Elizabeth Childs. So hello, Elizabeth.
Hello. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, so Elizabeth was on a recent episode. She agreed to stick around for this one too, so this should be super fun. And the layer between Anselm artist guest / host gets more and more permeable. Who's to say when one becomes the other? And also joining us, Mandy Hauk. Mandy,
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Now, Mandy, at our last recording, we recorded at your house, but you sat out because we have rotations here for 3 people.
Yes.
Any notes on the last one?
Any notes on the last one?
For any of us?
I was just trying to keep my dog from interrupting you guys.
Well, funny you should mention interrupting because...
Now, go ahead.
So, we recorded our last episodes, and as we're sending out the text for this episode, Mandy apologizes to us all for interrupting. And if you've ever spent any time around my family, you'll know like that stuff, it's just white noise. Interrupting in a loud voice is just all part of it. I didn't even notice. But Mandy, thank you for that.
I was actually, let me interrupt you to say, I actually am like panic. Just the last episode, I just felt the one about rejection. I felt like I had so much to say that I was talking over people, and so I was actually going to look for reviews and see if if any listeners had commented on how Mandy should really just be quiet.
Well, some listeners might do that as a joke now.
Don't. Please don't.
Don't do that.
I'm fragile.
Mandy, just so you know,
yes,
I did not think it was a problem to begin with, but now, because you've mentioned it, I'm going to make fun of you anytime you actually do it on accident.
Okay, noted.
It's just going to happen. I'm going to put it on the table.
All right.
Okay, so this episode, it was kind of my turn to present one of my kind of hobby horses here, and this is an issue I've been sort of toying around with for several years. For those interested, I wrote an article about this. I was in Mere Orthodoxy several years ago. And I've kept on thinking about it. And that is the joy of rules. Elizabeth just rolled her... Lisa / Elizabeth just rolled her eyes at me.
I know.
Should I roll them even bigger so you can hear it on the podcast?
When I'm not podcasting, I'm a lawyer. One of the things about lawyers, we really love rules. And I'm also an outliner. I love those rules too. And I've been a lifelong fan of detective fiction. And detective fiction is an area where we really need rules. So I want to talk about today the many ways that rules can make our art more poignant and more joyful.
Elizabeth?
Or not.
No, are you noticing like the flush in his cheeks and the animation?
Yeah, do you think he maybe doesn't believe this totally?
He's so excited.
I thought you think he super does.
Yeah. No, I thought he was getting really...
most in the world.
Just get that little sparkle in my eye when talking about rules.
Yes.
Just like a 13-year-old talking about their first crush.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
But the opening quotation is from the great Christian writer / detective fiction author / generally brilliant person, Dorothy Sayers, and it is the dogma that is the drama. Whoa.
Whoa.
Okay.
Go, Dorothy.
Elizabeth is only shaking her head now, so moving in the right direction. So first of all, let me tell you about just some background on the rules of detective fiction. We've talked about this in previous episodes. We had Sarah Pottinger on the podcast. She knows way more about detective fiction than me. Sarah will probably be correcting some of the stuff I say, so I apologize to her in advance. But the rules I'm talking about really go back to the Golden Age, which were early 20th century, so like maybe 1910 to like 1940, give or take some years there. And especially goes back to the Detection Club, whose august membership includes G.K. Chesterton, Dorothy Sayers, Agatha Christie, Ronald Knox, etc., etc. There's a whole bunch of others who I read, but others don't, and that's okay. But they required their members to take an oath. Now, this oath is tongue-in-cheek, but there's still a serious point, and I will now read the oath that its member authors had to take before joining the Detective Club.
Did they have to lay their hand on, like, a detective novel, or...?
Probably.
Okay.
They had to lay their hand on The Hound of the Baskervilles. They had to wear Sherlock Holmes' little deer hunter cap.
Yep.
Do you promise that your detectives shall well and truly detect the crimes presented to them, using those wits which it may please you to bestow upon them, in not placing reliance on nor making use of divine revelation, feminine intuition, mumbo-jumbo, jiggery-pokery, coincidence, or act of God? So that's clearly amazing. And one of the key things going there is the idea of fair play. In detective fiction, I think this is something that we can expand later on to all fiction, but with detective fiction in particular, you want to play fair with the audience. You want to make sure that you do not make promises as an author that you must later break. And this also later became codified in some rules of detective fiction that were written by Ronald Knox. Ronald Knox was a Catholic priest and also a successful detective fiction author. He's a fascinating person. He is woefully neglected, especially in Protestant circles. But he's written a lot of popular apologetics works that I think are really, really great. He was a really insightful social critic, and he wrote really fun detective fiction. And he was very adept at navigating the different conventions and analyzing different trends in the detective world. And by the time he was writing this, I believe he was writing these in the 30s, there was already a lot of pretty awful detective fiction out there. A lot of detective fiction that was, crass, that was cheap. It was just trying to mass produce to make a quick buck without really worrying about literary merit or playing fair with the reader. So in response, Ronald Knox gave a series of rules or commands for detective authors. I'm going to read some of them to you, and I hope you all will catch on the same theme, and that's that of fairness. The criminal must be someone mentioned in the early part of the story, but must not be anyone whose thoughts the reader has been allowed to follow. I'll probably do that after everyone, so just get ready for the Next, all supernatural or preternatural agencies are ruled out as a matter of course. Thank you, Mandy.
You're welcome.
Elizabeth, you're welcome to do that too. If you just read something by Ronald, that Monsignor Knox, that you find especially wise. Not more than one secret room or passage is allowable. You can do this once, just don't get carried away. Next, no hitherto undiscovered poisons may be used, nor any appliance which will need a long scientific explanation at the end.
Yes, very good.
Oh, there.
I agree.
Good job.
I agree with that.
Isn't it better when you just go along with the points I'm trying to make?
Understand that rule. That's what I'm going to say.
Next, no accident must ever help the detective, nor must he ever have an unaccountable intuition which proves to be right. Next, the detective must not himself commit the crime. The detective must not light on any clues which are not instantly produced for the inspection of the reader. Next, and this may be my favorite one, the stupid friend of the detective, the Watson, must not conceal any thoughts which pass through his mind. His intelligence must be slightly, but very slightly, below that of the average reader. And finally, twin brothers, and doubles generally, must not appear unless we have been duly prepared for them. So we'll see, again, want to come back to the issue of fairness. The ideal detective novel will present enough clues to the reader so that theoretically the reader could piece them together and solve the crime before the detective does. In a well-written detective novel, the reader is not going to be able to do this. The writer will outwit them. But then going back and reading through the series of clues, they'll be able to go like, oh, yeah, and just think, oh, fair play, or whatever people say. I say fair play sometimes, but I know I'm not typical there. So, Elizabeth, your thoughts on these rules? Great, really great.
So many choices you've given me. No, I really don't have a problem with these kinds of rules, especially for a genre like detective fiction. I absolutely agree that you need to prepare your reader for the ending of your story. That's something that you can apply to every single genre and piece of writing in the world. You have to set up your ending. And that's really what they're getting at here, is that you need to welcome the reader into your story and let them feel like it can't be trick fiction. You can't trick them in the end. You've got to be hospitable, and you cannot. Breaking these rules feels antagonistic to your reader. And movies do this all the time too, right? Like you've got to see the musical themes at the beginning to really get the end. Like I'm thinking of Inception in particular. Right. They really set up their ending really well. A movie that didn't. I just watched Woman in the Window, which
I read the thriller just sort of on a lark.
Oh, did you? Okay.
I didn't care for the ending.
Yeah, no, neither did I. Because,
so I can skip this one.
Because they kind of play fair, but not really. Because you get to the end, I won't spoil it, but I won't spoil it. But you get to the end, and then they kind of flash back to show you where they kind of like laid in the clues, but not really, not enough. And so in the end, you kind of feel like, well, I couldn't have ever guessed that, and that's not fair. And so I absolutely understand these.
Yeah, and I related to that, so Woman in the Window, very quick plot synopsis. It's a woman who has severe agoraphobia. She thinks she sees a murder in the house across the street, but she's also on pills and little free with the wine. So we're not sure whether...
Are we talking about the woman in the window? The woman across...
Well, that's the parody.
Oh, okay, because I saw that one.
I haven't watched that one yet. I haven't watched that one yet, but...
I have...
Kristen Bell's great. I don't know.
Okay, this is what I will say.
Don't worry.
I love Kristen Bell. It definitely earns the mature rating.
Okay.
Particularly in one episode. My issue with that, and I know I'm going off track. I had a hard time because it's dark humor. But to me, I don't want to care about the character in a dark humor. And they made me care.
Interesting.
And so I felt a little put off by, I was like, oh, it's funny, but I care.
But did you watch Woman in the Window, though?
I did not watch
because it's supposed to be a parody. Because I watched the first episode of Woman in the whatever,
Yeah, I know.
It's too long. Woman in the house across the street from the woman in the window.
From the girl in the window. Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I can tell that they're making fun of stuff that I don't get. So I had to go back and watch.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
Anyway.
So I didn't do my homework and watch the source material.
Okay, all right.
It's sort of like when I used to listen to the Weird Al parody version of a song before the actual song.
Oh, yes.
I know Amish Paradise so much better than Gangsta's Paradise.
Okay.
But anyway, but going to what you said, Elizabeth, with The Woman in the Window, I do feel like overall they did not play fair. So there's a lot to recommend the book. Like it's kind of a nice thriller. It was a good way to pass. Like it wasn't bad. I enjoyed it.
Okay.
But I did feel like the ending kind of was a letdown because they didn't duly prepare us for the ending, and for reasons that would be a spoiler, I felt like the ending was kind of a cheat.
Yes.
So it sounds like Rear Window, but if Jimmy Stewart were drunk.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely there's definitely some Rear Window homages there.
Right.
You can definitely see that.
Okay.
But yeah, it does go back to audience expectations and fair play. So Mandy, your sort of review of The Oath and the 10 Rules from Ronald Knox. Do you?
As you mentioned, I love the idea that Watson needs to be a little bit stupider than the reader. It never really occurred to me that he was. I just thought I was really smart. No, I'm kidding. But something that really had not occurred to me is that the aspect of the rule that says all of his thoughts must be revealed. Like I had not thought of that. So that's what's interesting to me about these rules is I hadn't really thought of them, but they all ring true. Now, one thing I would say, do you think there is there's got to be a balance between making it possible for the reader to solve the crime before the detective and then making it too easy? Because I get annoyed if I
you
solve
guess
it too soon.
Yeah, so that is a balance.
Right.
The perfect detective novel, which happens, it doesn't happen often, but the best way for it to happen is you read through it, you're trying your darndest to guess, you're looking at, you can tell if it's a clue, because like, oh, they picked up that scratched CD disc beneath the victim's bed, that has to be a clue, or else they wouldn't have mentioned it. You're following all the clues, you come up with your solution, then you realize you're totally wrong. But then when it's explained to you, you look back through, it's like, oh, it was there, I just missed it.
Right, I love that.
That's the ideal.
Right.
It's so hard to do.
It's very difficult. There's basically 3 main ways that it can go wrong. Or maybe there's more. I might be doing that thing where I said 3 and I can only think of 2. Anyway, there's several ways it can go wrong.
Okay.
The first is to not play fair. So I hate it when this happens, when the killer is revealed or the mystery solved and you look as like, there's no way I could have solved that. That you introduce... Like the detective had clues that I didn't have access to. It was solved by happenstance.
Right.
It's just not something that could have been done. The second one is the audience can tell who it is. And sometimes it's because of the clues, which is actually more forgivable. Right. If you leave clues and you're just a little too obvious in the clues and the audience can get it, okay. You messed up, but you messed up playing fair. The worst way, when you've read the number of Agatha Christie novels that I have, you start to learn some of her moves. And I have gotten it to the point where Agatha Christie is a great plotter. Okay, so she's great, but lesser writers do this more often. She does this sometimes. I have guessed the murderer just because of like the narrative beats. It's like, so this one is the maneuver, 12-C, where it's the person we'd least suspect. So it's the super nice old lady. Oh, there it is.
The one where you most medium suspect.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like the old Law and Order episodes where you're like, well, it can't be that guy because it's only 8:15.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Exactly.
They're not going to find the right guy until 8:45.
When you figure it out for reasons that do not have anything to do with the clues and have everything to do with like slavishly following the beats, that's when you can get into trouble.
It's so hard to do. Yeah. It is so hard to do well. And I haven't written any detective fiction, but I did write a short story recently about, well, I'm going to spoil it, but it's about a serial killer. But I don't want the reader to know until about halfway through that it's about a serial killer. And it is so hard because I've got a dual narration going on. Okay. I've got one of his victims and then also him. Right. And I have to leave just enough ominous clues and imagery so that I know that my readers know by halfway through. And while I was writing it, I was like, okay, I really can't control when they figure it out. As long as they know by halfway through, that is okay. But I needed so many readers for that story to be able to like combine that feedback and be like, is this working or not? Because I had no idea. It's so hard to know whether you're placing the clues deep enough or not deep enough or whatever. Right. So I have a lot of appreciation for people who can do this well.
I have a half-finished manuscript that is supposed to be a detective fiction, and I'm trying to do it according to the rules because gestures generally to everything about me. Right. And I've just realized it is very difficult. I have my solution in mind. I have the clues in mind that I'm going to weave in. But even though I have that, I feel pretty good about like how the murder happens and all that stuff. But planting the clues and figuring out when to present different facts about each character. Because like each of the suspects, you need to have your own... They need to have their own mini narrative, right? They need to have a plausible reason that they want to kill the person who died. They need to have things that they're concealing from the detective that the detective needs to discover. Some of it's going to be relevant later on. Some of it's red herrings. And figuring out how to plant that in what is oftentimes just a series of conversations. So much of detective fiction is the detective interviewing the witness or the suspect.
That's a good point. It's a lot of dialogue.
A lot of dialogue. Something like the Maltese Falcon, I was reading an analysis of it, it's basically just a series of conversations that happens in San Francisco. There's not a lot of action. It's a good book, like independent of its genre. It's just a good book because he does a good job with his conversations. And so for Lisa, Elizabeth. what you're doing there, it shows how this can go beyond it. So what the story, it sounds like what you're writing, it's not a detective novel, it's literary with like some thriller elements.
Kind of horror elements probably. Yeah.
So thriller horror, but it's still, the build up and the fairness elements still sound like they're important.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to do, man. Especially because I don't plot out my stories. Because it kind of sounds like a dream for you. You know, you could plot this for days and weeks and months and have this entire document of all of your clues and everywhere they need to go.
Right,
or whatever. Color coded and, you know, little tabs everywhere. And that sounds great.
Maybe
to
scented,
for you.
like various ways.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Blood scented. Gunpowder scented.
Gunpowder scented. Yes.
The detectives' lines smell like rich mahogany.
No, but it was a challenge for me because I don't typically write that way. Like literary fiction is on the very other end of the spectrum from detective fiction as far as like genre rules go. So it was a challenge.
Well, and that's what I write. I write literary fiction, and I would never trust myself to try to write detective fiction at all.
As a whole different kind of brain that I would need for that.
Because for me, see, here the inherent reason that I don't like to outline is once I have figured out what's happening in the story, I lose all interest in the story.
I absolutely
and then I
agree.
stop writing because I just did that. I'm in my who knows what rewrite in my novel. And I figured out that it was a 3-act structure, and I was I just sort of looked at it and I said, oh, look at that. It's a 3-act structure. Okay, that will help. Because as you know, Elizabeth, the drawback to not being an outliner is we make messes.
Oh, yeah.
And then we have to go, well, shoot, now I have to go backwards and fix that. And I get especially in like the umpteenth rewrite, I get weary of the messes. And so I was like, okay, 3-act structure, I can figure out what the conflict will be, and then I'll just follow that guideline. But then I literally could not get myself to sit down at the desk and write because I didn't care. You lose the soul of it.
Yeah, you lose
so
the
if
soul
I were to write something where I knew what was going to happen, because the way I write as if I'm reading it. So I'm not going to read a book if I know everything that's going to happen, right? By the same token, as soon as I know what's going to happen, I don't care to write it. So now I have to scrap all that and make something else happen.
I mean, you can't just like write the detective novel, then you get to the end, it's like, all right, I need to go back and look through these clues.
Yeah,
you know?
Who did it?
Was this a clue? This might be a clue.
Wait, maybe I accidentally put a clue there. So to me, looking at people who love to write detective fiction, I just I stand in great respect and awe because my brain does not work like that.
Yeah, and it is a tricky thing because the skills required to come up with a good mystery are oftentimes different from the skills required to write something that'd be more standard, like what we consider great literature. It can happen, like there's that guy Shohei Ohtani for the Angels in baseball, who is the best batter in the league and a really good pitcher. I know.
Did not know about
Isn't that cool?
Oh.
Like if he was just okay
That's
at
really
both
rare.
of those, that would be amazing.
Elizabeth
but
is
he's like the best at both.
Yeah, no.
I have no idea.
Pitchers are notoriously not good at batting.
Okay.
So basically, to have someone who has the skill set of plotting and executing a great mystery and having like the characterization, the interior struggles, just the style and the consistency of the prose. It's kind of like you need an Ohtani guy or girl, right? I'm sure they exist, but they're very rare. And when you find a work that is both a good detective mystery and is good literary, you just hold on to it and you never let it go.
Right.
But
do you have any authors that you come to mind that have bridged that gap? I mean, I think I mentioned this. We talked about this before. My mom loves P.D. James, but my mom doesn't tend to really love super literary. But she has had me read a couple of P.D. James books, and they do seem more character driven. P.D.
James is really good. She doesn't follow quite as strictly to the rules of detective fiction.
Okay.
But that's not. She doesn't follow. She's not like Ronald Knox compliant, but they're still pretty standard murder mysteries. And she is a good writer. Like her prose style is really good, and she is capable of writing good literary fiction. Like her one sort of toe dip in the water turned out really well. Like Children of Men.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that is literary with the sci-fi setting, and it's really good.
Okay.
I think she was really successful at it, and it got turned into a really good movie that is nothing like the book, but both are really good. So what do you know? But yeah, P.D. James is one. More contemporary writer Anthony Horowitz can do that.
Okay.
He doesn't take it quite as seriously. He has more fun with it, but that's still good. There's a really good... There was a great book about it. I'm going to look this up while you all are talking. And I'm going to let you know. Then G.K. Chesterton kind of does strays into there. At her best, Agatha Christie can approach good literary writing. She's not quite there. She's a great plotter and pretty good at characterization in prose. But she can approach it with some of the stuff.
Did you know that she never listed her occupation as writer? She always listed her occupation as mother. Because to her, it was just something she enjoyed doing.
Huh.
Yeah.
I don't know what I think about that.
It was incidental. Well, I mean, if you put it in her time period, you know, I don't think she was devaluing what she did as a writer.
Okay.
She loved it so much she did it because she loved it. And so to her,
I'll give her the benefit of the doubt.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Agatha thanks you from the grave, however long ago she died. Did you find the book?
It has the word bluebird in the title.
It has the word bluebird?
I'm gonna find this. Don't worry.
Find it. Okay.
But anyway, so going back to something that I think is a fascinating relic and also shows the strengths and weaknesses of the Golden Age approach is a work called The Floating Admiral. It was written in 1931 by 14 different members of the Detection Club. It was sort of a group project. And the way it was conceived, one person would write a chapter, then they would write what they believed the final solution would be. They sealed up the solution, they sent the chapter on to the next person, who would write the next chapter, seal up their solution, send it on to the next person who would write the next chapter. So it's sort of like a round-robin novel.
Wow.
And I read it. It's really interesting. The ending is actually pretty satisfying. Like, you read it, it's like, okay, that kind of makes sense. But they really cared about fair play. Like, Dorothy Sayers wrote the introduction to it. And she put, each writer must construct his installment with a definite solution in view. That is, he must not introduce new complications merely to make it more difficult. Each writer was bound to deal faithfully with all the difficulties left for his consideration by his predecessors. I love that for a couple reasons. First, again, it gets to fair play. Second, it gets to something that I think is very common in TV shows, especially some even like prestige TV shows, where the show gets started, they don't quite know where they're going with it, they're assuming it's going to get canceled in a year or two, so they just throw in a bunch of crap.
Lost.
Yes.
Yep.
I at one point in my life, I wrote 10 new rules of detective fiction because this is how I spend my time. Right. And one of my rules was no polar bears.
See, please don't get angry with me. I think you're far enough away. I actually love Lost, but I totally see the issues because, yes, there are so many issues. But I actually liked the show Lost. I'm one of the rare people who even liked the ending. So I know.
I gave up way before the ending.
Very controversial.
I loved like the first 2.5 seasons.
Yeah.
And then things just got
then I'm
crazy.
Out.
No, I've watched it through like 3 times. I like the characters. Sawyer. I like Sawyer. Oh. Have you ever watched it?
Yeah, no, I like
No,
Sawyer.
because he has the whole character arc of Sawyer. That's what I keep. That's what I'm in for.
It's been a very long time since I've seen it.
I loved it until I realized, they don't know where they're going with it.
They have no idea.
Once you can tell, then it's ruined.
Yeah.
Even if it ends out okay, you're like, well, they just lucked into that.
Yes.
You know?
They shot a polar bear. Why? Oh, no reason.
I don't know.
Yeah.
By the way, I looked it up. The novel that I'm thinking of that is a good detective novel, and actually, I think a really good work of literary fiction is called Bluebird by Attica Locke.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I was right. Bluebird.
By who?
No.
Attica Locke.
Attica Locke. Okay.
So
can we just take a moment that he said the word bluebird is in the title?
And it was twice.
Twice.
I was
and
doubly
then
right.
Not only that, but that's it. That's the only word in the title. It's just twice.
It's really great. And one of the reasons is the premise. Like the detective is he's a Texas Ranger, but he's African American, and he has a really interesting background. The murder involves lots of very interesting like racial, historical problems that I think it deals with pretty deftly. And it stands on its own pretty well as a detective mystery, too. So
when is it set?
Modern day. So I think it was written probably like 10 years or so ago.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So yes, it's a good one. Where was I going? You made fun of me for getting the title right. And where did we...
Just completely derailed that.
Yeah.
Way to go.
Oh, yeah. Lost in the polar bears being bad. Yeah.
Oh, right.
So but again,
I think we wrapped that up.
That goes to fair play, and that goes to being fair with the audience. Throwing in stuff without really having a plan in mind is not being fair.
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting to me because I think the whole concept of fair play, I think it goes to what the reader is reading the book. What is their purpose for reading the book?
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
a reader of, and this can be the same person, like you would read a detective novel differently than you would read a literary. So I'm not saying you, Matt, would read everything the way you read a detective fiction, but anyone who's sitting down to read a detective novel is approaching it partly for the characters and the setting and all of that, but also there's the game, there's the puzzle that they want to solve, and I think that's why fair play, as you put it, is so like specific to detective fiction. Like as Elizabeth said, there are rules in all kinds of fiction. But for detective fiction, just because you know that the reader is more of an active participant.
Yeah, I mean, detective fiction obviously is on the far end of what needs concrete rules
Yes.
to make it work. And you definitely know whether you succeeded or failed when you get to the end of a detective novel. I think probably second up is romance.
Yes.
Romance
has lots of genre rules.
Lots of rules. You've got to have happily ever after, or what do they call it? Happily for now.
Right.
There's actual like terms that people throw around when they're talking about writing.
There's like
romantic
things
comedies.
like the meet cute. There's the proof of love, which is like the crux scene of it. There's so many rules.
And if you don't do that, like people are left really disappointed. Like I'm thinking specifically of the movie The Breakup. With Jennifer.
The Breakup.
Well, everybody does.
Yes.
Everybody does, because it's billed as a romantic comedy.
Yes.
Right? And even the dialogue and the scene and the way that they filmed it makes you think this is a romantic comedy. They're going to get back together at the end. Well, they don't.
And then they don't.
So even if you go into it...
It's ridiculous.
Right. Even if you don't like romantic comedies or whatever, you go into it thinking that's what this is, and you're left disappointed. You feel cheated and tricked at the end.
Yes, exactly.
And if they had just said, like, this is just some movie, like, nobody would have cared.
Right.
You know? And it's also not that great of a movie, so
No,
nobody
it's
would have
not.
cared. But,
Well,
at least people wouldn't be mad at the end.
Right.
It's a marketing failure, really, is what it is for that movie. But,
I'm no Jennifer Aniston fan, so that was
Whoa.
Well,
I just watched it for Vince Vaughn.
Okay.
that's a whole other thing.
That's
isn't
a
it?
Just
shall we
really
have-
glad Danielle's not here to hear this Jennifer Aniston slander.
That's all right.
So something I think is very significant with what you said there about detective fiction and romance, because they have actually a lot of things in common. Like you mentioned, both of them are very rule bound and both have very stringent audience expectations, where it is very possible to fail, and when you fail, the audience goes crazy on
Make
you.
it brutal.
And something else related to that is there's a lot of each of those books in that genre. There are a ton of detective novels. There's a ton of romance. And that means, if we're looking at it, if there's so many, not all of them can be good.
What?
So this was something I was telling you all about this Raymond Chandler essay, The Simple Art of Murder. But one of his points, and it's a critique of the sort of golden age whodunit, but a point that he makes that's very valid is there's a lot of bad detective fiction. That's because the genre is so popular, more books get published.
Right.
So if you have a middling work of literary fiction, it's never published. If you have a middling work of detective fiction or a middling work of romance, it may get published, which means there's a lot of middling, not very good stuff out there.
Interesting.
And it's interesting, one, shows popularity. If we can have like a cause and effect thing with the rules, like, does the fact that it's popular mean all these rules sort of grew up around it? Or does the fact that it has so many rules make it popular, like they found a secret formula? I don't know. But these two that are very popular have a lot of bad representations in the form, also have very strict audience expectations.
Well, and I think because it has the rules, then it can I think a lot of writers might just approach it like a plug and play. Like, I'm just going to, go along and follow the formula. And I actually have a friend who has written a ton of romance novels, and then she decided she wanted to write a women's fiction novel. And her romance readers read the women's fiction novel and went after her in the review because they thought it was going to be a romance novel. And she's like, well, so she actually started writing women fiction under a different name so that her romance fans won't stalk her.
That's tough.
So,
I mean, there's good and bad to that, right? Because you're writing with a built-in audience already in mind, and you're able to kind of contribute to this big, huge body of literature that's already out there in whatever genre it is.
And the audience knows you well enough that they know what to expect from you.
Well, they don't even need to know you. They know the genre.
Yeah.
They know the genre well enough. So you don't even have to sell yourself or your writing style necessarily. But with literary fiction, it's totally different. You kind of feel like you're starting from scratch every single time.
Absolutely.
Because what you are selling is your writing style.
Correct. Right.
And that's obviously a much harder sell.
Especially as a first-time author.
Oh, yeah.
It's literary and we don't know who you are.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
it's working out great for me so far. It's fine.
Yeah. It's fine. Me too.
Yeah, I know.
But going back into audience expectations, and so we already talked about audience expectations. There's two sides of that. There's a good part and a bad part. Like we like to tell jokes about things like Hallmark Christmas movies, where they're
so easy.
They're extremely formulaic. They're very easy to tell jokes about. Even people, my guess is like 99% of the people who enjoy those movies would like the jokes about, 'cause like they get it, right? But that's what the audience expectations are. You don't go to a Hallmark Christmas movie expecting to have new epiphany about the nature of love and human existence, right?
Right.
If you want that, you go to other things. You watch a Hallmark Christmas movie. If you just want to sit down in December, drink your Jingle brand Hallmark wine, put on your comfy clothes, wrap up in a blanket, and just feel Christmassy for a while. That's why you do it.
Yes.
Yep. Or if you have a lot of painkillers in your system, like I did.
Exactly.
The last time I
or you're on a lot of painkillers, and you're suddenly like, hey, this is great.
This is really good.
Wonderful panacea.
This overworked big city lawyer who's moving to her small town is making some really good points.
Yeah. Boy, she really better dump that uptight fiancé and get back together with her high school sweetheart.
And she will.
And
she absolutely will.
Yes, because he will help her save the family vineyard.
That's right.
Where they can produce more Jingle Cabernet Sauvignon.
I mean, just to show you that, my mom is she loves those movies. Like, she'll just basically have those on in the background the entire month of December. But, like, she gets it. Like,
my daughter loves them.
Yeah, when she sees...
Older daughter, not younger. Bethany would be like, Mom, not me.
When she sees a new one, she likes to send us the title, and then all of us kids will try to, like, guess the plot based on the title. And it's a very fun game. But anyway, I think there is an importance there with the expectations, especially with detective fiction, where the expectations are so narrowly confined that it is very easy to neglect some other aspects of the art. A lot of these are pointed out. I mentioned this earlier. Raymond Chandler, he wrote this really famous essay, I think it was in The Atlantic in 1944, called The Simple Art of Murder, where he kind of lampoons a lot of the tropes of Golden Age detective fiction. He has a couple big critiques of it. One is that it's unrealistic, I mean, obviously, and the other is that it's contrived. Basically, the unrealism it's obvious. There are all these very fancy murders at fancy manor houses where the famous detective happens to be there for a holiday. That this happens more than we would expect in real life. But here's what he said about just like the psychological unrealism, which I think he would find the more serious thing. Here's Raymond Chandler. If the mystery novel is at all realistic, which it very seldom is, it is written in a certain spirit of detachment. Otherwise, nobody but a psychopath would want to write it or read it. The murder novel has also a depressing way of minding its own business, solving its own problems and answering its own questions. He's absolutely right. I mean, in most murder, like classic detective fiction, More recent stuff, I think, is different. But the classic, like Agatha Christie, Dorothy Sayers, they don't dwell on the dead guy that much.
Right.
They certainly don't dwell on the psychological trauma that could happen from, having a loved one murdered. More often than not, the person who gets murdered is a jerk, and we're all kind of glad to see him go. It's nice because, one, it means everybody's a suspect.
Right.
And two, it means the audience doesn't have to feel icky by feeling sad about, a person getting murdered. So that is potentially a downside. And I think I mentioned this to you all earlier, but there's a whole genre of its own about this. Like, there's a subcategory of detective fiction called cozy mysteries. Mm-hmm. And the concept of a cozy mystery is, yeah, there's murder, but we're not going to be all dark about it, right?
Yeah.
It's light.
It's cozy.
It's cozy, light murder. There's also whole TV shows that are light murder. The ones that come to mind right away would be Psych and Monk. They're comedies, like they're supposed to be funny, but there's a dead guy in every single episode.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Which is weird, right?
Right. Yeah.
Light murder.
Yes.
It's like the complete opposite of what I write.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Could you imagine me writing cozy mystery? Like, this is like the opposite. I'm like, we need to delve deep into the psychological pain that these characters are experiencing. Like,
Elizabeth, if I found out that you had like secretly published a cozy mystery, I think the guild would stage an intervention for you.
Oh my God, you should. You should.
Well, I remember my mom loved Murder, She Wrote.
Yeah, I mean, that's another cozy mystery.
100%. But I was always like, even as like a middle schooler or whatever age I was, I remember thinking, how can there be that many murderers in this one little New England town? And then I remember in later seasons, Jessica's always traveling. But then... I'm like, what kind of jinx? She goes on vacation, and wherever she goes on vacation,
I
someone's
never
murdered.
stayed at a hotel where someone was murdered.
No,
I can say that never.
Never.
Yeah.
Not one time.
It's true.
But again, so that was the first sort of main point that Chandler had against it. And again, anyone who reads a detective novel would agree. And it's because we don't want to focus on the murder. We want to focus on the mystery, which you could say is a good or a bad thing.
Well, that's basically an earned suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
And so, like, Chandler... bless him, but he needs to lighten up a little bit, because yes, he's right, but I think he's not taking into account, like, the readers aren't stupid. They don't enjoy it because they don't know, because they're ignorant of this. It's just they have chosen suspension of disbelief because they enjoy the ride of the story and trying to figure it out.
Yeah, and that's related to the next main criticism he has, and that's that the plots are contrived and not ultimately convincing. Here's sort of his take on it. There may be one plot somewhere that would really stand up under close scrutiny. It would be fun to read it, even if I did have to go back to page 47 and refresh my memory about exactly what time the second gardener potted the prize-winning tea rose begonia. There's nothing new about these stories and nothing old. They're too contrived and too little aware of what goes on in the world. Okay, so you should know the essay's really real well written and really funny. Like, Chandler's a great writer.
Of course, it's Chandler. Yeah.
And again, he's right.
Yes.
If you seriously scrutinize these murder plots with, like, the real world, none of them hold up. He spends a lot of the article lampooning a really famous detective novel called The Red House Mystery, which was widely considered one of the best of the Golden Age. I've read it. I really enjoyed it.
Which member wrote it?
Oh, this is a nice little bit of trivia. It's written by A.A. Milne. The Winnie the Pooh guy.
Really?
Oh my goodness! I
might have to read it.
I absolutely have to read it now.
It's like quintessentially Golden Age. If you like that genre, you like the book.
I had no idea he wrote anything. Wow.
Other than Winnie the Pooh.
Correct.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
He also wrote one of the most acclaimed works of the Golden Age of detective fiction. But so Chandler goes through point by point and sort of points out the many inaccuracies, the unrealisms, like, hey, this murder plot would never actually work. And again, he's right. And 99% of detective fiction readers would be like, yeah, so?
Exactly.
So that kind of leads to another larger issue, is does it say something bad about the genre if when we're confronted with obvious flaws, like, real people wouldn't behave like this, or the situation's really contrived, you care more about the puzzle than, like, the human characters, our response is a shrug of the shoulders.
That's interesting. I mean, it depends on why you're reading fiction and why you're writing it too, right? If you're writing it for entertainment and reading it for entertainment, then you just want what you want, which is an entertaining experience that you can count on.
Right.
If you want insight into the human condition, you go to literary fiction.
Right. Yes.
You know, that's what that's for.
Mine and Elizabeth's, if they ever get published.
Right.
That's where you go.
And there are rules
Evangeline.
there too.
Yes.
They're just more wishy-washy and a lot more vague, and it's harder to tell if you have succeeded or not.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
So I don't know. I think there's a beauty in being able to say, like, this was a satisfying story, and I know it because it followed the rules. Like, there's real value there. But there's more mystery in literary fiction because when they nail it, you don't know why.
Exactly.
And it's beautiful.
Right.
However, when they fail, you don't know why either.
That's
true.
Tough. That is true.
Especially when you're writing it.
Yes.
Because it's harder to fix, harder to figure out why you're failing, why your readers aren't connecting. And when readers read literary fiction and they get to the end and they have feelings like, well, I just didn't enjoy that. It's really hard for them to tell you why they didn't enjoy it.
Exactly.
Because literary fiction has rules like characters must be psychologically complex.
Right.
And the characters have to be in the driver's seat and not the plot. And you can't make things too comfortable for the reader. And so it's just hard to know if you're hitting those marks.
It's not as not as readily quantifiable.
Right. So I think there is I don't have much of a problem with readers saying like, so what? This couldn't really happen because isn't that all of fiction anyway?
I would hope so. I mean, magical realism, hello.
Yeah.
But also,
romance, come on.
I am pretty weary of I feel like there's so much, I don't know, we need to coin a term for it, but there's like shame. I remember seeing all over Twitter people who were bragging about not watching the Super Bowl, and I'm so glad my husband doesn't like football. And I'm like, congratulations.
That's not my corner of social media.
Well, I know, right? But honestly, I'm like, what is that really something to be proud of? Like, people take pride, and there's
not
this,
enjoying the cult,
not enjoying.
Here's something that lots of
Right.
people enjoy. I don't enjoy it. That makes me sophisticated.
Have you guys seen all the? Have y'all watched Ted Lasso?
I love Ted Lasso.
I kind of love it. Yeah.
There are people on Twitter who
Don't
brag.
like it?
No, they brag that they have not watched it and they will not. And I'm like, well, congratulations for robbing yourself of joy.
Okay, well, I don't. All right.
I don't.
Oh, Elizabeth kind of sympathized.
I kind of understand that poll because, like, basically, if everybody likes something, I'm never going to do it. Like, I'm never going to play Wordle. Okay, never ever.
But are you going to brag about it and wear it? Oh, maybe you will. Okay,
maybe I will brag about not playing Wordle.
Well, I have played Wordle and now I'm annoyed because the Times owns it and I probably will stop. But anyway,
I understand the drive to do that, but it is kind of silly.
But overall, I just feel like the inclination to judge other people for liking something or not liking something. I just want people to just relax.
Just enjoy things.
Go read your own book.
Yeah.
And you don't have to like what
Mind
I
your
like.
business.
It's not a character flaw for me to like romance novels. I personally don't like romance novels, but I don't know. It gets a little bit it gets a little silly.
I think I understand what you're saying, though. Like, once you have established these rules so concretely and they're so well defined and followed kind of to the letter, like, do you rob yourself of the ability to be creative within the genre? In the genre, you know, because you know what readers are expecting and you have to deliver. And so, in that way, literary fiction is a lot freer. You know, you can kind of do whatever you want, whether whether you fail or not is kind of your business.
So how do you differentiate yourself within the formula?
Right.
Yeah, so that is tricky. And again, there's a lot of people, I think, try to differentiate themselves more modernly. It's less common to have the deaths in like the posh manor house that nobody cares about the dude who died.
Right.
Like, they're usually detective fiction will be under the crime unfiction umbrella where it's like a detective. They go into more depth in the murder. A lot of the characters are more psychologically complex, and they succeed to varying degrees. Like, there's some works, like I actually think Bluebird's a good example of this, where I think they largely succeed, and it's a compelling story, but the detective aspect is secondary to it. Okay. It can work, but it's not driving the boat there.
I see.
It's more of a crime procedural / literary. So couple couple points related to what you all mentioned. First of all, I think it's important to emphasize that it's not like there's this huge gulf between literary on one side and genre on the other. And there's there's several reasons for that.
Not, right.
First, and you mentioned this, Elizabeth. Can I call you Lizzie?
No.
Okay. You mentioned you mentioned this earlier, Elizabeth. Literary is its own genre. There are genre rules.
Yes.
Some of them may not be quite as hard and fast as other genres, but it is a genre. It has genre rules. And second, you can have a literary work that also incorporates different genre elements. There are beautiful literary works that have sci-fi, that have crime, that have fantasy, that have all these different things. There's a lot of fluidity and a lot of crossover between them. So we shouldn't, there's a very lazy sort of faux intellectual way of thinking. The sort of thinking that's like, oh, I'm sophisticated because I don't enjoy Ted Lasso.
Exactly.
It's like, oh, there's literary, then there's genre. Right. No, there's a lot of in between. There's really crappy literary books, and there's really great genre books, and there's a whole lot of great books that are kind of in between.
You know the best one? Station 11.
That is really?
Such a good book.
Okay, it's been made into like a TV show, right?
It is now. I haven't seen the TV show actually, but
I've been on the fence about it because I heard it's really good, but it's kind of a lot.
The book, I don't know anything about the show, but the book is wonderful.
I have a friend who loves it and a daughter who hates it and hasn't told the friend that, because she's like, I don't think I can keep watching. But I have no, that's okay. I'm Swiss.
Yeah, no, it's by Emily St. Mandel. Emily John St. Mandel or something like that. Emily Mandel St. John.
Bluebird.
No, Station 11. And no, it's really great. It's literary fiction, but it's got near future speculative elements to it, and she does it so well. It's wonderful.
Well, and
maybe that's where the freedom is. Sorry. Yeah. Maybe that's where the freedom is finding literary works that can use genre elements and twist them. And not have to stay loyal to the rules of that particular genre. They can take them and use them for their own benefit,
right?
And kind of surprise the reader in that way. And since it's billed as literary fiction, they can get away with it,
right?
Yeah, and that goes to reader expectations, right? Because someone who does this quite frequently, someone like Cormac McCarthy, where he has books that are. They're literary, but they also have like Western elements.
Exactly.
Or there's one that's apocalyptic sci-fi. And he didn't bill it. He didn't bill The Road as, oh, it's a sci-fi thriller. No, it's literary, but it still utilizes a lot of those genre elements to its advantage to help serve the story.
Right, because the story is really about humanity.
Yeah.
And so it's the setting. No, it isn't.
No. I thought you were saying. I totally agree with you.
Oh, yeah, I
love it
so
much.
Oh my gosh,
I love it so much.
Well, and I mean,
so dark.
The book that I got my agent with is just straight up literary fiction. But then the next idea I had just happened to be set in 1929. That's the one that I'm rewriting for the 40 millionth time. Like how my number changes every time I bring it up. But since that one's set in 1929, my agent said we can bill that as historical fiction, which will make it easier to break in.
Interesting.
Because we can tag it with a marketable genre.
Yeah, and the
one that I write it well.
Right. The one I am querying right now is literary fiction with psychological horror elements.
Woo! And from you?
From me. Can you imagine?
So off-brand.
I know. And the next one that I am starting to write is literary fiction, but it's really like a ghost story.
Oh, neat. Awesome.
So yeah, that's my bread and butter is like literary fiction with genre elements. That's my thing. I love it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And that all, again, this is one of my main hobby horses. Whenever I'll see something, it's usually by someone it's usually someone who's writing in a fancy paper who doesn't specialize in it. It's like, oh, well, I have my literary stuff. It's like, blah, 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 blah. Okay.
Right.
Okay. I just talked in the last episode about how I still like The Great Gatsby because it's good, okay? I like Great Gatsby. I like the Beatles.
Hey,
I like Stranger Things, okay?
Oh, I love Stranger Things.
There we go.
My agent named her daughter Zelda, so you tell me if she likes F. Scott Fitzgerald.
There we go.
Or video games. I don't know.
No, it's
That's definitely something she's had to deal with a lot.
Yes.
Probably true.
That was my first thought.
I didn't even think of that. No, she actually took a picture of herself when she was pregnant with Zelda, standing at Zelda Fitzgerald's grave.
Oh.
And I wish I could remember now, but there was some sort of joke about like how Zelda is in the grave and the womb at the same time.
Oh,
I'm a very
ooh.
cool agent. You would like her.
Love that. Yeah.
She's
I love
quirky.
All right. Well, we are actually winding down here. So I didn't let you guys know, but I know that detective fiction is kind of my little niche of section. But are there any detective fiction works that you guys really enjoy or could recommend?
Oh gosh.
I have never read one. Did you know
You
that?
haven't even read Agatha Christie?
No.
Oh my
my
goodness.
sister just recommended Death on the Nile to me, though. Is that a good
Yes.
one?
It is.
Yes.
And
And that one
I
was-
saw
it's-
that they're turning it into a movie.
It's
with
a
that.
quintessential Agatha Christie.
Okay.
Hercule Poirot
She says
story.
it's her best. She says it's her favorite one. So
Yeah, Peter and Bethany, my younger daughter Bethany and my husband Peter, they went to see the movie on Saturday because they both read the book, but I need to read the book first.
Did they like it? Did they like the movie?
They did. They said
Okay.
they were worried on the commercials because they said it looks like they changed all these things and la la la. But apparently they both thought that the changes that were made were good changes. Well, it's
Okay.
Kenneth Branagh. I mean, he's not gonna, but Murder on the Orient Express is my favorite Agatha Christie.
My favorite is And Then There Were None, but the
That's-
other ones are
that's a good
excellent
one, too.
too.
That's-
And
that
again,
one's
these are
famous.
ones, Lisa, so expectation setting.
Very formula.
They are detective novels. There's some character development. It's not bad. It's not bad, but
Okay,
it's
okay.
it's pretty good. But you
Pretty
come for the
good,
mystery,
okay.
stay for the pretty good character development.
Okay. I will manage my expectations.
My daughter Bethany loves literary fiction, and she is an Agatha Christie geek. Not because it's literary, but I'm just saying she's a picky
Okay.
reader, and she loves Agatha Christie.
All right. I'll give it a
And
try.
also, don't overthink it. Read some Sherlock Holmes.
That is impossible. I will overthink everything I read.
I-
Until the day I die.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, I think the first Agatha Christie I ever read was What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw. And
That sounds like the name of a detective novel that was like parodying detective novels.
there's
Yeah,
an
it does.
there's an alternate title. It has to do because what Mrs. McGillicuddy witnesses a murder in a train that's passing by her train. Yes, I know, suspension of disbelief. So the alternate title is something about the train's arrival time, like 3:10 from London or something. I don't know,
Okay.
but
Okay.
Wow, this is just it's like a twist ending here. You dropped this bomb on us.
that you
I
have never read.
apologize.
I know.
Thank you for joining us in the talk, even though this is not your preferred
Hey,
genre.
I
And
have a lot to say no matter what you
and I'm going to apologize in advance for all the recommendations I'm about to give you. But anyway, thank you both for joining us. This is a really fun talk, and as y'all can probably tell, things are winding down at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. The customers are trundling home. The fire's down to embers, and you've polished off your last glass. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time.